A cell without a mark. Concrete smooth as marble, corners precise to the millimeter. A stainless steel toilet gleams under permanent light. The air tastes of antiseptic, filtered, temperature-controlled, and utterly still. To the casual eye, it's immaculate. To the architect, it's perfect. To the inmate inside, it's the end of sound, smell, and meaning. In this room, nothing rots, nothing rusts, nothing changes. It is as pure as mathematics and just as merciless. Welcome to ADX Florence, the cleanest prison in America, where the floors shine, the records balance, and the mind unravels. For decades, the Bureau of Prisons has presented ADX Florence, the federal Supermax, as the pinnacle of modern correctional design. Opened in 1994, it was built to house the worst of the worst. But the myth of ADX has always rested on its aesthetics. Its cleanliness, its order, its silence. Politicians called it humane containment. Journalists, barred from entry, described it as boring, sterile, and safe. Yet beneath the spotless surface lies something far darker. This film will reveal how the very qualities praised as progress, cleanliness, order, and silence, have become instruments of psychological torture. ADX Florence is not a failure of design. It is a masterpiece of control. And that's precisely what makes it brutal. The 1980s were the decade of control. Across America, prisons were erupting, Attica in the 1970s, Marion in 1983. Each uprising drove a new architectural obsession. Containment not by violence, but by design. The Bureau of Prisons turned to engineers, not wardens. The question wasn't how to punish rebellion, but how to make rebellion impossible. In 1994, that vision materialized on a barren plateau in Florence, Colorado. 37 acres of reinforced concrete, isolated by desert and distance. No skyline, no sound, no horizon. ADX Florence, officially, Administrative Maximum Facility, a structure that promised an end to chaos. Every detail engineered for predictability. Every variable, sound, light, temperature, sightline, controlled. The architects called it the clean model. The warden called it the first truly safe prison. But behind the language of safety lurked another word: perfection. From above, ADX resembles a mandala, radial symmetry radiating from a central surveillance hub. Each housing unit, range, step-down, control spirals outward like petals of precision. Cells are poured-in-place concrete modules, 12 by 7 feet, containing concrete bed, a fixed desk, a small polished toilet sink unit, a 4-inch slit window angled toward sky, not landscape. No bars, no visible locks. Everything is internalized. From the air ducts to the floor drains, the building eliminates irregularity. No surfaces for graffiti, no screws to hide contraband, no shadows for secrets. To the Bureau, this was hygiene, the sterilization of disorder. But to those inside, it was erasure. A place so clean it scraped away the traces of human life. ADX was designed around absence. Absence of touch. Absence of color. Absence of unpredictability. Each door slides silently by hydraulic pressure. Meals are delivered through a mechanical slot. Stainless steel on stainless steel. No voices. No footsteps. A former warden once described it proudly. There's no chaos here. Everything runs exactly as it should. He was right. That's the problem. Because order without deviation doesn't create peace. It creates vacuum, a psychological condition closer to sensory deprivation than discipline. Dr. Craig Haney, a psychologist who studied supermaxes, described ADX inmates as people slowly unmade by the absence of experience. In such a clean environment, the mind becomes the only thing left to contaminate. Who are they? The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. The shoe bomber, Richard Reed. The 1993 World Trade Center bombers. Gang leaders, cartel lieutenants, domestic terrorists. And among them, hundreds of lesser-known men. Lifers who assaulted staff, organized riots, or were simply deemed unmanageable. To outsiders, ADX is where the monsters go. To insiders, it's where the forgotten vanish. Each inmate spends an average of 23 hours a day alone. 1 hour of recreation. In another empty concrete pen, slightly larger than the cell. No communal yard, no contact visits, no programs. Everything, showers, exercise, legal calls, happens on a schedule so predictable it erases time. Days lose distinction. Years dissolve. In one lawsuit, an inmate wrote, "The walls are so white I stopped dreaming in color." Cleanliness here is not aesthetic. It is enforcement. Floors are scrubbed by machines, walls power-washed weekly, uniforms replaced regularly. Even the air is filtered at precise intervals. But this immaculate environment has a secondary purpose: to remind inmates that their bodies are the only things left imperfect. They smell, sweat, bleed. The building does not. The contrast becomes humiliation, a form of moral sterilization, where disorder equals guilt. A former inmate said in deposition, "You start to feel dirty just existing. The place itself rejects you." That's the hidden brutality. The way the environment turns purity into punishment. ADX is not chaos. It is bureaucratic precision incarnate. The step-down program, a multi-tiered behavioral progression, measures inmates by compliance metrics: silence, cleanliness, obedience. For each month without incident, privileges increase. A few more phone calls, a TV channel, eventually limited human contact. Failure resets the process to zero. This is not rehabilitation. It's conditioning. Psychologists compare it to operant control laboratories, reward systems designed to extinguish free will through repetition. And because the structure is so clean, the system appears humane, data-driven, measured, scientific. Yet the human outcome is indistinguishable from slow disintegration. In 2012, a bureau spokesperson described ADX as the most secure, humane prison in the world. Mainstream outlets repeated it. They called it a clean prison, a quiet place, the end of violence. Images circulated: gleaming corridors, polished control panels, spotless cells. No blood, no chaos, no screams. No visible brutality. The myth of cleanliness became its own form of propaganda, convincing the public that order equals ethics. But look closer. That shine is not mercy. It's reflection, the institution staring back at itself. Every element of ADX's design creates distance, not just between inmates but between society and what it does in its name. Because the prison is hidden, silent, clinical, the public feels absolved. There are no visible beatings, no riots, no squalor to indict the conscience. Brutality here is procedural, not physical. It's in the paperwork, the sensory deprivation, the perfect schedule. In a way, ADX isn't just a prison. It's the architectural embodiment of a national delusion, that control without cruelty equals justice. The walls are spotless, the air recycled, the order absolute. And beneath it all, something quietly dies, not from violence, but from cleanliness perfected. Every element inside ADX Florence exists to enforce one principle: separation disguised as order. The architecture does not shout. It whispers discipline. Where older prisons relied on bars, noise, and presence, ADX relies on absence. Each 7 by 12-foot cell has a solid steel door with a narrow window double-sealed. Behind that door, the inmate can see only a sliver of sky, never the ground. No guard walks past. Surveillance happens through silent cameras, remote-controlled by operators who will never make eye contact. The plumbing is independent for each cell. No shared drains, no common pipes. Even the airflow is isolated, ensuring no sound, no scent, no trace of another human can pass between spaces. From a logistical standpoint, it's brilliant. From a human standpoint, it's extinction by design. This is not a malfunction of the system. It is the system. In 2013, a journalist described ADX Florence as a prison without dirt. The phrase stuck. Floors polished to a matte sheen, walls pressure-washed, windows spotless. When former officers are interviewed, they often note how peaceful it feels to walk the corridors. No shouting, no chaos, just the hum of HVAC and the occasional echo of a gate locking several units away. They mistake quiet for peace. But the quiet here is curated. Every surface, every sensor, every ritual of cleanliness has a secondary psychological purpose. To normalize total submission. You cannot fight filth if filth never appears. You cannot rebel against a system that erases evidence of your existence. A psychologist once described the atmosphere inside as a blank moral canvas, antiseptic to the point of anesthesia. The inmates don't see blood, but they feel decay. It's just been engineered out of sight. To understand the mechanism of the clean prison, you need only follow one life, Thomas Silverstein. Convicted for multiple murders inside federal facilities, Silverstein spent 36 years in isolation, much of it at Marion and later at ADX. He lived without human touch from 1983 until his death in 2019. His cell was pristine, polished concrete, stainless fixtures, artificial light time to simulate day and night. He described it in a letter as a tomb with a shine. Silverstein wrote, "They took away the chaos and left me with nothing. Nothing hurts worse than nothing." Over decades, he developed hallucinations, voices from walls, figures in reflections, phantom conversations. Doctors noted these symptoms not as delusions, but as adaptive cognition, the mind manufacturing reality when the environment provides none. The system that kept him safe also erased his humanity. And the brilliance of the design is that it leaves no fingerprints, no beatings, no bruises, no screams, only silence that stretches until it becomes violence itself. The United Nations defines clean torture as coercion that leaves no visible marks. Sensory deprivation, extreme isolation, psychological dismantling, all fall under that category. ADX Florence is a masterclass in it. Its architecture inflicts suffering through precision. Temperature calibrated to neutrality, never cold enough to shiver, never warm enough to comfort. Light levels constant, erasing circadian rhythm. Ventilation steady, removing the sense of change. Color palette restricted to beige, gray, and white, visual starvation. This environmental monotony acts on the brain like a narcotic withdrawal. Neural stimulation drops. The mind turns inward, searching for pattern, producing hallucination. In studies conducted by the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, inmates in long-term isolation at ADX reported auditory hallucinations, 74%. Severe anxiety and panic attacks, 63%. Depersonalization, the sense of watching oneself from outside, 57%. Suicidal ideation, nearly all long-term cases. The brutality here is clinical. The instruments are HVAC vents and fluorescent bulbs, not batons. ADX operates like a corporate entity. Every minute is logged, every variable quantified. This precision has a cost efficiency. No fights, minimal medical emergencies, predictable staffing. But silence is expensive in other currencies. Former officers describe developing tunnel hearing, the ability to pick up microsounds like breathing through walls. Many transfer out within a few years, citing insomnia, mood swings, and paranoia. The environment sterilizes empathy. When every sound is a potential violation, every silence becomes compliance. The result? A feedback loop of control where officers monitor inmates monitor themselves, and the building monitors everyone. It's a closed circuit, a moral vacuum sealed airtight. ADX advertises a step-down program, a behavioral pathway that allows inmates to earn transfer to less restrictive units. But the process is Kafkaesque. To progress, inmates must demonstrate consistent positive behavior, measured through silence, neatness, and compliance. In other words, survival requires surrender. One former inmate described it as learning to disappear on command. Those who fail the program, often because of mental illness exacerbated by isolation, are deemed non-compliant and kept indefinitely. The cleaner they behave, the longer they survive. The messier their humanity, the more they are punished. That's the paradox of the clean prison. The closer you come to sanity, the less human you become. In 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a landmark settlement acknowledging that ADX had violated the Eighth Amendment by failing to provide adequate mental health care. Over 100 inmates had documented severe psychosis. Several had committed suicide under direct observation. Yet even in court filings, the language remained sterile. The facility maintains a safe and sanitary environment for all residents. The bureaucracy couldn't describe suffering in emotional terms, only environmental ones. The word clean appeared repeatedly. Cleanliness in this context is moral camouflage. The absence of visible pain is mistaken for the absence of pain itself. To grasp the psychological impact, consider the sensory equation of an ADX cell. No touch plus no sound plus no color plus no spontaneity equals cognitive drift. Over weeks, neural pathways governing spatial awareness begin to degrade. Over months, language fragments. Over years, perception disassociates. Inmates describe forgetting how to read, losing the sense of the passage of time, even struggling to imagine faces. One wrote, "I know I have a mother. I just can't picture her anymore." This phenomenon, depersonalization through environmental stasis, has been studied in astronauts, polar researchers, and sensory deprivation subjects. But nowhere is it institutionalized at this scale. ADX has turned psychological collapse into policy. Imagine you are inside. Every surface reflects light at the same mat level. The concrete hums faintly under air pressure. Even your footsteps make no echo. You begin to perceive the building not as a structure, but as a sentient environment, an entity that listens and responds. This is not metaphor. Neurological studies show that extreme isolation triggers anthropomorphic projection, the brain assigning agency to the inanimate. You begin to believe the light flickers in response to thought. The vent breathes when you exhale, the walls listen when you whisper. In this way, the architecture becomes a hallucination machine. The clean lines that once symbolized control now become instruments of torment. Prison reform advocates often describe ADX as a contradiction, a place that claims to protect society by erasing individuals, yet depends on those individuals remaining sane enough to obey. The system demands both obedience and consciousness, two states that cannot coexist indefinitely in isolation. And because the building is so impeccably maintained, there is no visual evidence of suffering. Cleanliness sanitizes cruelty. Silence erases witness. That's the genius of it. You can't photograph despair when it's invisible. When congressional delegations visit, ADX prepares like a gallery. Fresh paint, polished floors, inmates locked out of sight. Guided tours move briskly through the corridors. Guards describing procedure, architecture, efficiency. Feels less like a prison and more like an exhibit. Order on display. No smell, no sound, no chaos. Just the illusion that control equals civilization. Visitors leave convinced they've seen progress, that this is what a modern, humane prison looks like. And that's the most dangerous myth of all. Between 1999 and 2014, at least 6 confirmed suicides occurred inside ADX Florence. All were initially reported as medical emergencies. In some cases, it took weeks for the Bureau to acknowledge them publicly. There were no bloodstains, no riots, no evidence of struggle. Just men quietly ending their lives inside immaculate cells. One staff psychologist called it clinical euthanasia by environment. When journalists later asked for details, the Bureau's official statement repeated the same line. The institution remains one of the safest and cleanest facilities in the federal system. This is the final mechanism of the clean prison bureaucratic absolution. Because ADX looks immaculate, administrators feel absolved. Because staff procedures are orderly, morality feels irrelevant. Because the suffering leaves no trace, accountability evaporates. Cleanliness doesn't just sanitize space, it sanitizes conscience. The illusion of a clean prison protects the system from seeing what it's done. The building itself becomes the alibi. The myth of cleanliness persists because it comforts. It tells us that cruelty, if polished, is progress. That sterility equals civility. That a silent man is a safe one. But silence is never neutral. In places like ADX Florence, it's the sound of something very old, humanity itself being scrubbed away. To understand ADX Florence is to understand the civilization that built it. The architects who drafted its blueprints didn't imagine cruelty. They imagined order. They believed in the American promise that technology and design could solve any problem, even violence. They created an environment so precise, so mathematically balanced, that chaos had nowhere to hide. But what they created instead was a mirror, one that reflects our collective belief that cleanliness and control equal morality. In this mirror, the absence of blood becomes the proof of justice. The silence of inmates becomes the sound of success. The erasure of life becomes a design feature. ADX Florence is the architectural embodiment of a nation that mistakes efficiency for ethics. In Washington, ADX Florence is politically convenient. It exists as a rhetorical shield. Whenever critics challenge America's carceral system, policymakers gesture toward Florence. We don't torture here. Our prisons are humane, safe, and clean. Cleanliness becomes policy language, a euphemism that transforms suffering into procedure. The public rarely questions what safe means when applied to those already sealed away. Congressional hearings quote statistics: 0 escapes, minimal assaults, perfect compliance rates. No one asks the question that matters. At what cost? ADX isn't an aberration. It's a prototype, exported as a model for new facilities across the country and even abroad. Each iteration promises better management, fewer incidents, more control. Each iteration refines the same mistake, confusing absence of disorder with presence of justice. The ADX design has been copied in at least 12 states. Federal contractors marketed it as the Florence Standard: modular, scalable, efficient. Foreign governments toured it, took notes, and built their own. HMP Belmarsh in the UK, the Fleury-Moroghis High Security Wing in France, parts of Japan's Fuchu prison. All adopted elements of the same logic: isolation through cleanliness, control through silence. The architecture of ADX became a global export. It was America's new moral technology, the sanitized cage. In each country, the justification was identical. We are modern. We are humane. We are clean. But underneath the universal language of order was the same equation. Sterility equals safety. Safety justifies suffering. You can't measure what ADX does in recidivism rates or disciplinary reports. The data looks good: low violence, few incidents, minimal staff injuries. But the damage isn't measurable in numbers. It's in what disappears: language, memory, imagination. Former inmates released from ADX describe an inability to process sound, light, or proximity. They cross streets compulsively at precise intervals. They flinch at movement. They describe panic in open spaces. The world feels too loud. In a study by the Federal Defender's Office, 91% of released Supermax inmates reported long-term cognitive impairment. Many requested reincarceration, not from nostalgia, but because ADX had taught them that life was unlivable without its structure. The prison didn't rehabilitate them. It rewired them. ADX Florence costs roughly $70,000 per inmate annually, double that of a standard high-security facility. The justification is security and cleanliness. Less maintenance, fewer injuries, fewer staff hours per inmate. But the economic efficiency is deceptive. It masks the costs shifted elsewhere into mental health care, disability, suicide litigation, and civil settlements. In 2016, the federal government quietly paid millions to resolve lawsuits over untreated psychosis at ADX. None of those settlements included public admission of wrongdoing. Each was described as an agreement reached in the interest of continued operational integrity. Even the language of liability is clean. No guilt, just equilibrium. Inside the Bureau of Prisons, Florence functions as a kind of sacred site, a cathedral of administrative purity. Everything is logged, measured, optimized. Every deviation is corrected before it becomes visible. The staff's authority rests not on violence but on procedural scripture. The manual, the directive, the memorandum. In this theology, paperwork replaces punishment. A clean report is salvation. A quiet cell is virtue.